We are live. Welcome. In this show, we have all sorts of awesome things. My name's Steve Jaguar.
And I'm Mike Foster. And welcome to Yes, welcome.
We're slowly getting our intro right. Slowly.
Yeah. You look a lot more tan. The sun's been getting you on the side there. So yeah, like Steve said, we got a great show for you today, talking CNCF supply chain best practices. Big vulnerability for VMware that we want to break down. And we're going to be talking OPA, and it's more specifically Styra. So
yeah, we have Anders Eknert, special guest, who's going to be joined, second special guest we've ever had. So that's pretty awesome, considering last week we talked about Styra. So we've got the real deal here too. Well, and if you're in the chat, whether you join now or whatever, throw questions in. We love questions.
Yeah, we'd love to pass them on. So if you're following on Twitch, again, follow, like, share. We're going to send out some clips after if you want to check this out later. So if you want to just check out Styra, we're going to ship that out too. If you're on YouTube, you'll be able to catch all the videos there. If you missed anything, like, share, subscribe, and we love your feedback. So let us know, reach out.
All right.
Let's get into it.
Shall we get into it? Share my screen.
To kick it off.
There it is.
It's dynamite.
And dynamite. TNT targets Kubernetes. I think we probably knew that. I think they've been on the show. We've had TNT on the. That would have been nice. Because like for the past almost the duration of us doing this show, TNT have been featured. But what's awesome about this article, because the first they had a crypto miner, then they were doing denial of service. Then they were doing now like their own IRC chat, like or something. But what's cool about this article isn't just the research on how many IPs have been compromised with their worm. Like that's a lot. Certain countries feature prominently in this diagram. But the breakdown, how a cluster is compromised, how they land, how they expand, how they use randomizers to establish files, how they use those files to set up the environment, the way they use base64 content to download the IRC bot, and then how they scan for 1050, access the kubelet, and if you have not done any of the sort of basics around kubelet security, it's kind of game over for you.
Yeah, it is really interesting. First order of business is to disable bash history of the target host, define environment variables for the CNC server, install a crypto miner, create it inside the temp folder using random 3 times, so generating some numbers, so it's really hard to detect. Looks like I have lost some video for some reason, but
you have no video, but keep talking.
I think I got hacked.
Well, they even drop a kube.c, so like to try and start mimicking Kubernetes binaries, and so that they don't, obviously detectable. It's elaborate. I'd love to see like a redo or a remake of what they're doing, but it's interesting how it breaks down. I think if you want to learn about Kubernetes security, and this is like a real world sequence that takes you through what they're doing, it's out there. This is great. This is a proper technical breakdown of what's happening, along with advice on how to secure the kubelet, kube API server, as you go through, as it gets broken down. So I think this article is like a must read for anybody into Kubernetes security. So it's pretty awesome from Trend Micro to throw all that out there.
Yeah, they've been doing this for like the last 3 months, you said?
Yeah, there's older articles. Like here's one previously that also goes into how the IRC bot deploys. I mean, this is from December, right? So they're a good 6 months in, and they're still out there and still compromising Kubernetes. So I remember back when I was at the research team that was at Aqua Security, they do a lot of this research via honeypot. They look at the way things come in, they break them down, and they do a really good job of doing the same kind of work that Trend Micro is doing. But it was probably only end of 2019 where they started to see attacks advancing beyond crypto miners, where they were land and expand command and control centers, like becoming more modernized and matching the kind of attacks that we saw pre-Kubernetes. So it's cool.
I just, as a more cultural comment, interesting to see the adoption of a specific, let's say, application like Kubernetes, and then the exploits as it comes later. Because it's not like hackers are going to be super far ahead of the general knowledge base, of like Kubernetes users, right? Like you adopt Kubernetes, you're not going to expect people are going to be extremely sophisticated, but it's more interesting to see, like, as Kubernetes matures, the hackers and the methods of exploiting Kubernetes also matures. Just, it's kind of a cool pattern.
It is. It's awesome, and the time is running out on people with older versions of Kubernetes with the bad defaults. Man.
Yeah, no kidding. It's a big one.
All right, should we move on?
Let's do it. Yeah, you put this next one in. It's the Venn diagram.
I'll just jump right to it.
Yeah, this is a good one.
I have to zoom in. This was, if I just click that, it's going to go big, I assume, right? There we go.
Nice.
Kelly Shortridge, author of the Secure Chaos Engineering book, has a sense of humor, obviously, as well. Weightless protection. Well, let's see. Let's check it out. Infosec, weightless protection. Okay. Absorbs quickly. I don't know about that one. Reduces damage. Good. Great for everyday use. Sandbox ready. That I like.
Non-clogging. Broad spectrum defense.
This is obviously marketing. Yeah, truly.
Mm-hmm.
Invisible, of course. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Product marketing. I think that's the best thing, is like when people pitch Infosec, it's like weightless protection. Yeah, you'll get it in quickly. It'll like just cover all of your issues. It's invisible. Nobody's going to notice that you have new security programs in place. I think somewhat of a wish list too. Yeah. When things get pitched.
That's what product marketing sells, though. They just sell the wish list. They sell the desire.
Yeah. That's
very good. All right. We don't have a what do I call it? We don't have a sting for comedy. We're getting more things like that, though, where people are just kind of taking the that's a Britishism.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. All right, on to the next big sort of CNCF announcement. CNCF, they released their supply chain best practices PDF book. This is partially because of the new supply chain working group and security. It was sort of a combination of work being done. There was a good solid chunk of people who were interested in this this paper and had been working over the last couple of months to set up. So I want to bring it to you. There's a whole blog. The PDF is actually up on the CNCF GitHub, which I will drop in the chat for everybody if you
great
right now. And you can go and download it. It's 40 pages. It's a good.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, pretty big weekend read.
It's reasonable. So we're going to have to do that because Foster's been away and I have not read 43 pages. I guess that's a valid question, right? Are people going to read 43 pages on securing supply chain, given supply chain has probably been the single most thing we've talked about on this show over the past, like 19 weeks or whatever it is we're on now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to check it out because I want something to agree with me or to learn, one of the two. I think immediate criticism.
Just like a read thing when you're doing it. It's like scope versus non-goals. I don't know. It's like scope versus out of scope. I don't know. Just
or not goals.
Just came off weird to me. Yeah. So it's pretty interesting because they go through all of these different, like, securing the source code. So what they try to do from a high level when I was scrolling through this is they give, the 5 different layers of supply chain, and they say securing the source code, source/dependencies. Here's where it is. Here's the things that you can do. And if you go down to like securing the source code, it goes like verification. So require signed commits. They don't necessarily do any prescription for what tools are needed, but it's here are the things that are within your right. Yeah, there you are. So, and then they also have an assurance categories, moderate to high, and risk categories, moderate to high.
It's good. It's really good. I think what I would really look forward to, and this will probably happen. So people who are working on this at the moment, to see like the more PowerPoint, the lazy viewers version of it is what I kind of going for. to see, because I had a presentation that I did, which went through different layers, and I had more layers than this. So I really want to kind of, it's nice to see some sort of agreement. And then maybe I can, they do actually they do the odd, so they've mentioned truffle hog here for preventing secrets into the source code repository. So there is a little bit of suggestion there, but yeah, it would be good if anybody who's watching the show, go read it. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, and I'm gonna try to get to it this weekend and I'll have my thoughts too. So next week,
trust that we will have this condensed into a few lovely brain nuggets.
Yeah, very, very small nuggets. There's not a lot to go around. So, but yeah, it's pretty cool. And honestly, 40 pages, especially for people who donate their time too. It's a good job.
Yeah.
For them. And there's a lot of good points. I mean, even just from a skim, I mean, they're hitting all the things that you need to know. So awesome. Look forward to talking more about that on another just sort of general announcement. CNCF did release this little like CNCF students sort of chat, and they have a CNCF student channel, and they're, if you're younger and you're looking to get into it, it's a good place to start. Or if you have somebody who wants to get into the ecosystem, that's one way of doing it. But yeah, so it's just announced, and honestly, CNCF is pretty open. You can get into meetings. You could do, you could join working groups. You can get into things like, working on ebooks. So really good resource, and yeah, check it out if you are young and want to get started. Actually, I shouldn't say young, just students at every age.
Want to get started.
Yeah.
Bastard.
I know. Crazy.
All right.
Heading into the craziness with a big vulnerability.
Is this are we on WTF yet?
Well, it could be WTF, but we need like a CVE sting.
That's
what we don't have. Sting. Yeah. So big vulnerability out here, VMware with a 9.8.
That's the highest.
That pretty much up there.
Yeah, like that is crazy. You read any comment on this one?
yeah. Big quotation. Serious.
Yeah. That's it. That's what you got to know when it's a 9.8. And yes. Probably, unlike the Kubernetes one we just talked about, where we were like, okay, well, first they got in, and then they randomized things, and they jumped, and they scanned for ports, and they moved to there, and it's like, wow, what did they do to get into this one? I'll show you. They searched on Shodan and went, oh, that's open. That's bad. So that's kind of it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little bit of remote code execution, but basically any sort of vSphere center, vCenter that is open to the internet has this flaw, which basically, because it's a 9.8, if you get access on port 443 and you have access to the vCenter dashboard, you have access to everything. So I heard a lot of people comment of, why do you have public access to something like this? Why is it on a private network? Why isn't it protected, right? Like through a massive amount of authentication that's necessary. Yeah, a lot of good questions on this thing. It says total results, right? Yeah. Did they do the Shodan thing? Yeah, there was like over 6,000, right?
That's the Shodan one. I just did the Shodan just before the show, but so here are 6,000 results, but actually 5,266. So 600 people have worked it out.
It's their second vulnerability, second vCenter vulnerability this year, carrying a 9.8 rating.
Yeah, that's not great.
Yeah,
it's not great. Well, they're gonna bounce back, I'm sure.
Yeah, maybe we would go for the high score, 9.9.
Go for the high score. Yeah. All right. Yeah. That was a good one. Huge 9-point. We like 9-point vulnerabilities. We're almost at tool time. I can see Anders is in the green room. And we're going to bring him in 2 seconds.
Yeah, we have to get to the craziness, the even more crazy stuff.
Yeah. Humanity wastes 500 years a day on Captchas. I feel like I'm like 1 year of that. Click on the bikes. Click on the stoplights. Foster. Click on the stoplights.
Yeah, and what if you get one wrong? It's the worst.
It's like clicking on, it's like a series of postage, badly pixeled postage stamps and that say, click on the queen. You're like, what? Did I get her? I don't know. I hate Captcha. So yeah, I just thought it was funny. Largely it's going through and explaining the advantage of personal attestation, which I think we know that things like YubiKeys, I have a YubiKey. There it is. I've had it for a few years. They're cool. Get one of those. That's the lesson. It's just funny that they did some research because they have the research on how much time we spend on captchas. And Foster has disappeared again. He is now that creepy vinyl album with a sort of, I don't know, the man that normally appears on a toilet door in the middle of it.
I'm still here. I'm just this is what happens when you get a camera and you take it off of the mount for the week and then bring it back.
This is how Steve gets a new show partner. Well, seeing as I've got one waiting in the wings.
Uh-oh. I'm fired.
You're on your way, man. I was gonna move on. While you
yeah, I mean, I'm still here.
I will act like it's all cool.
Yeah.
So we normally have a set, like last week we had a thing where we talked about Styra's funding, and we're going to hear a little bit about that maybe from Anders if he's willing to talk about it, which was awesome. I think it was Series B. It establishes Styra as kind of a big player. But then I saw this tweet from Ron Miller, who's a journalist in the space, and he said, I would just want to point out that the volume of funding announcements is just over the top right now, and if you get in touch with me on the day of the announcement, I'm probably not going to be able to cover it. I thought, that's how we feel when we started talking about big spenders as a section in this show 20 weeks ago, and we thought it would peter out. And yet every week we've had something to say. And it turns out it's not just us. Journalists are like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, it's been insane. I have no clue where all this money's coming from. Yeah, I think I forgot to turn off like the auto turn off on my camera. So happens.
Mine does that too. I have to keep some.
I thought yours just goes blurry.
Mine goes blurry if I look at my beer fridge. So if I do this, it goes beer, and then it focuses on it, and then I come back. Yeah, it's a pretty smart camera.
Yeah, you can get your product placement that way. But yeah, speaking of big spenders, I mean, we just talked about this last week, right? With Styra. So it's a good segue.
And that's a good segue to have our guest join. Where is he? Let's bring him in. You bring him in.
I'm fighting you.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Anders. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. It's a beautiful evening here in Stockholm.
Yeah, no kidding. You look getting some nice sun there.
Yeah, we're not really spoiled with sunshine over here, but
I think
3 days of raining, and then yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, nice. Got the shirt going too. It's perfect.
Yeah, I do.
I wonder what he's going to talk about, Michael.
Yeah, you think it's going to be OPA? Crazy stuff. Yeah, well, thanks for joining. I am a huge, sort of policy engine fan. So I wanted to get your take on OPA, sort of a little bit of history of what OPA was created to solve, what are the advantages of using it, and also we'll start with that before I get too complicated. So a little bit of history and the advantages and why you're such a big fan.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the way I discovered OPA for myself was actually working for a company where we had a need to in this kind of heterogeneous, very distributed, diverse environment. We had, and my team had been building like these identity systems for a couple of years. And in these identity systems, it's kind of common if you know how OAuth, OpenID Connect, and such standards work. You have this concept of delegation. So any service or a microservice or an API, they don't really deal with the identity or authenticating the user themselves, but they rather delegate that responsibility to the identity server or the identity system. So we were all on board on that concept. And when you have this very diverse organization, we had like tech teams in 13 different countries. I think we had 8 or 9 different programming languages, and it was wild. So once we solved the identity problem, we all really enjoyed or liked that kind of delegated model, because it made a whole lot of sense when you have that kind of environment. So when we started looking into like authorization, how do we deal with like permissions and what our users are allowed to do in these systems, we could not really find anything equivalent to like OAuth or so. And even if OAuth describes itself as an authorization framework, it's really not a whole lot about authorization. So we needed something more fine-grained that would allow us, and that we could use in this very diverse environment, because we didn't want to go out to these teams and say like, yeah, you sort it out, because then we would have like 8 we would have one solution per programming languages, and of course the chances are pretty good that most of them would be flawed in some way. So we wanted a way to kind of unify policy, authorization, and so on. And that's kind of how I found OPA. And I think that kind of describes one of the key points of OPA as well. Like what's the motivation for OPA? It's to unify policy management and policy enforcement across the stack. So yeah, what's that?
That's perfect. And that was obviously heavily influenced by the declarative language, right? That has sort of bubbled to the surface in the last 15 years, right? Whether it be like Terraform or YAML files or JSON, right? That was sort of the enabler to kind of bring together all these languages and move away from more imperative ways of handling resources, right?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the main ideas behind OPA is that policies should decouple from the application, or that you should, so kind of like how you'd extract like the responsibility of storage to a database. That's kind of how OPA deals with policies. So your applications should ideally not need to know that there's an admin user, or there's certain roles or permissions, but you kind take that, you lift it out, and you move it into OPA, and that's what we call this decoupled policy model. So that was another, and about declarative languages. Of course, OPA uses its own language called Rego, which is a declarative policy language. It's sort of like SQL. It's a query language.
Yeah, that was actually, DSO just had that question of, is Rego difficult to learn? That's it's a tough question to answer, but you can try.
Yeah, of course. And I think it largely depends on like whether you have previous experience in query languages. It is because it is different from normal imperative languages like, I don't know, JavaScript and so on. I think like just learning the basics, I think you can do in a day or two, and a couple of days more, and you kind of know the basics. So of course it does require some investment in time, but I think it pays off quickly.
Awesome. So obviously OPA, we actually had this conversation about what's the correct pronunciation, and we settled on OPA, but it still goes back and forth all the time. Obviously OPA, and it's on the website that OPA is the clear-cut winner, but so OPA is upstream of Styra, correct? In terms of the policy engine, Styra uses OPA.
Right. So yeah. So Styra, the company, is of course one of the main contributors to the Open Policy Agent project, and Styra, the company, offers in terms of a product or so. It's support, of course, commercial support for OPA, and Styra offers a control plane. So when you need to manage, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of your OPAs, and you need a way to kind of to manage policies, to know exactly which policy is deployed to which OPA, keeping count or like observability, so you know that all the decisions that your OPAs take are reported back to Styra. So you can see that there's been violations going on in this or that service, or there seems to be an unusually high number of denied or so. So a control plane pretty much.
And one of the big issues you're solving for really is the scalability issue with OPA. I'd say in general from the open source product, right? Working with Rigo, how do you scale it? How do you make it so it's actually efficient at an enterprise level, right? That seems to be the sort of main thing Styra is solving for.
Definitely. But
question.
It's kind of like it's a model that I really like working with, because it's not like you can pay to have like an extra secure version of OPA or anything like that. It's all the same OPA. And if you're running OPA at a small scale, you might not need like the Styra control plane. So it's really a business model that I think Styra did well on. I think I know a lot of companies building commercial things on top of open source struggle with that, of course.
Yeah, DSO just dropped in the chat because I know that they can't write links, but play.openpolicy.org. Yeah, clever DSO. We got some smart watchers there. So if you're looking to do more in OPA, then you can go there. For Styra, what is sort of the like you said, it's more of an addition. You're not exactly getting like a more secure, let's say, product. What is the sort of big benefit in terms of policy management or risk assessment that Styra adds? So is there, let's say you have two policies, are we able to aggregate and show both policies together means like a higher risk, or is there sort of an external, like, is the UI sort of really bring out the fact of here are all the policies, here's the ones you need to know about, right? Because it's hard to sort of grasp that in the UI or sorry, on the command line if you're working with OPA, right?
Yeah, certainly things like that, like how you can share policies between systems, so that you can see in bigger organizations you might want to have sort of base policy across the organization, and then allow teams to add their own particular requirements on top of those. So that's one thing. And another thing are like Styra has these system types. So of course, being a general purpose policy engine, you see OPA deployed for both kind of the app authorization case that we talked about, and then there's also of course the Kubernetes use case for Kubernetes admission control. And in that case, for those kind of systems, OPA also ships with I don't know, I think it's way above like 100 kind of ready-made policies. You can obviously do things like that when you have when you know the domain. So Kubernetes admission control, whether you use OPA or not, is basically just determining whether something is allowed to be deployed or not. And some common like patterns or common rules there. Maybe you want to enforce that any deployment is labeled appropriately, maybe with a team name, a cost center, things like that, organizational requirements. But it could also be policies that kind of have knowledge about the state of the cluster. So maybe you want to prevent a new ingress object to be deployed if there's already another ingress object who claims that path or that host. So policies like that are pretty common, and Styra provides, I don't know the exact number, but I know it's hundreds of these kind of ready-made policies. So if you just want to get, and with a nice UI, so it's kind of, you can just drag and drop a policy and have it deployed out to your cluster. And there are new system types coming as well, and we're working on more things like that. So I think now we have Kubernetes, we have Envoy or Istio, and we have what we call custom systems. That's kind of app authorization. Mm-hmm. But we're definitely looking to kind of have more to make that first experience nicer. I think eventually you're probably going to want to write your own policies anyway for the most part, but you're going to just get started quickly and have these kind of these nicely packaged ready-made policies.
Does Styra help? Oh, go ahead, Steve.
So I have a question. Yeah, I think you've converged on a point with the discussion of OPA that is now treading into certainly super familiar ground for Foster and I, because we operate in the policy space. We understand Kubernetes. We see how it gets used with gatekeepers, an admission controller, and we've seen some of the policies that can be pre-written, and that gives us a lesson as to where we can go from there. But then when you first talked about your own problem that led you to OPA, that was a much grander problem, like on a whole, what that extends so much farther beyond Kubernetes. And that opens up your mind as to the possibilities of OPA. And I think a lot of people don't understand that OPA isn't just, say, replacing PSPs. It's something, it's not just Kubernetes. It is an extremely flexible language for creating policy of all sorts. And as you said, decoupled policy model, but the extent of where it can go and where you can dive in and where the community could create policies for areas that they have pre-existing knowledge is pretty large. Is that?
Yeah, definitely. And again, I think like the Kubernetes case, it's important, and OPA does a good job there. There are many other options competing with OPA in that space, and I think it kind of makes sense. Like writing an admission controller in whatever language you want, it's not like it's a huge task or anything. You can have an admission controller deployed in after like a few hours of hacking. So it's seemingly very simple, and of course the domain is well known, and the number of policies that you'll see, they're going to be pretty similar, whether it's OPA, Kubernetes, or whatever other solutions there might be. So of course, it's an interesting problem, and so, but it's also sort of a solved problem. I'd say there isn't really. If you go and look at like how is authorization done out in the wild, there's really there's no standards on how to do it. Of course, you have these kind of more overarching concepts like RBAC. Like role-based access control or attribute-based access control, but even inside of those kind of realms, there's no one who will tell you like this is how to do RBAC. So if you see like the Kubernetes implementation of RBAC, it's going to be a lot different from other implementations of RBAC and so on and so forth. So at least for me, it's a much bigger challenge, but that's also where the fun is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my most annoying questions whenever we're talking about policy and security in Kubernetes is, what are the standards used for these policies, especially when there's overlapping things in Kubernetes, like RBAC controls with volume mounts or something like that. It's like, oh, these are just best practices. Yeah, but for who, right? Like, how do you pick these? It's really interesting, especially when you get out of Kubernetes, and I think, Steve, like you said, into things like IAM roles for Amazon, for AWS, like all of that can be managed through OPA or OPA. I gotta get that saying out of my mouth now. It's brutal. I was literally saying it the right way until I started talking with Steve before the show about it, and now I'm hooked on it.
OPA.
No,
Iced by OPA.
yeah, we were saying other people say it, and now I started saying it. But yeah, no, like whenever I started talking about OPA, it was always within the security context, and you realize it is a very powerful management tool, especially for your DevOps engineers to manage policy, like cost tooling, right? If you're putting tags and making sure the tags are there in like AWS or GCP or anything like that, that's huge, right? From the use cases for Styra, are you seeing sort of this overlap in use? Or are you seeing it more used for DevOps tooling and then with like a slight, hey, we can venture into the security space? Or is it one of those technologies that kind of like bring security and, let's say, operations together a little bit?
Yeah, it certainly does. I think it's one of those tools. Like once it's inside of your organization, and you can and you're using OPA for, I don't know, Terraform or app authorization or whatever it might be. Then with all that in place, it's easy to kind of start looking into other domains where OPA might be useful, since now you learned how it works. Like you learned the basics of Isrigo, and yeah, that's pretty much what we did as well. And my previous job, where we kind of started with the app authorization use case. And eventually OPA spread into kind of the platform teams for Kubernetes. We also did config validation using conf tests, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's and again, it's the whole point of OPA is to be this kind of unifying policy engine. It's not to just solve one particular problem for one particular domain, but it is meant to be this kind of one policy engine to rule the cloud native stack.
The one to rule them all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in terms of the policies I picked, you said Styra ships with over 500, I think, policies sort of by default. Is there, what's the crowdsourcing for policies sort of look like? So let's say I want to edit or create new policies. Is there resources online? Do you go upstream more to push default policies? What is that general sort of process like for user feedback on policies?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, well, there are certainly like policy libraries available. People put their policies on GitHub and share them like amongst each other. We have a vibrant community sharing policies, discussing policies on our Slack, on Stack Overflow, and so on. But yeah, it's honestly one of the areas where I think we can improve is having a more formal way of sharing policies, maybe some sort of package management, or yeah, exactly like how we do it, I'm not sure, but it's currently more or less a manual process. So you can you take somebody's policy, like copy paste it, and so on. There's really no like automated way of doing it. There are nice ways of doing it, like with Styra and so on, but they're more like add-ons to the control plane. It's not like for OPA itself. So, but I know it's something we're looking at.
For Styra, when it comes to editing policies, what does it do different? What's sort of that policy editing / flow look like at all?
Yeah.
Because that, to me, the policy management with OPA, the open source tool, can be a little bit slow and complex. There is a little bit more of a learning curve, and so I was wondering if adoption and getting OPA into the org is the hardest challenge, and once it gets adopted really well, to me it seems like the biggest goal for Styra is to cut that down, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. Like what Styra offers is kind of an editor, like an IDE.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a visual editor. It's still code, but there's also work in progress to have things like policy builders, things that where even if it might not be like entirely graphical, like drag and drop, but it still like simplifies writing policies. So you have the usual things like autocomplete and so on, but also kind of visualizing policies better.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's definitely a big part of what the Styra DAS provides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome.
And it's something that we're actively working on improving.
Yeah, and you got a little bit of funding to get that done.
You say feel free to
Sorry?
share anything. Feel free to share screen if you'd like to show us any of these wonderful innovations that you're talking about. I know you didn't have to do a demo, but we managed to convince Liz Rice to do a demo when she said she wasn't going to do a demo.
Any chance you have a UI up?
Let me see here. I don't have the DAS up here, but can.
Oh, no worries if you don't. Then we'll have to have you on again to go through the full demo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
of course, we should do that.
Now I really want to see this because I didn't know there was like an IDE kind of environment. I don't know if there's like if I bring Isrigo into VS Code, is it smart? Does it figure it out? This is the kind of thing people want to know, that kind of syntax highlighting and all that.
No, of course. Let's see that.
Because the other sort of thing that
you just put yourself on mute there, Mike.
Yeah, I'm a mess this morning. It's Friday. Camera's not working, mic's not working. One of those things, one of those days. But I was interested more in like the Terraform workflow of how it manages policies and different sort of resources and modules, right? Where you go to the cloud, you can see people posting their own modules, and then depending on the plugins, you can pull from there. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to have some sort of repo like that for OPA, right? Where it's here are the policies for Terraform, here are the policies for Kubernetes, right? Here are the policies for Envoy, and you can kind of go through and you can see which ones are maybe like the most pulled or the most used.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah, Terraform's model is really good for that, isn't
it? Yeah, because it's more of like the copy paste and Stack Overflow. Anders, I don't know if you've watched the show, but we were talking about this a couple months ago about how many copy and paste there are from Stack Overflow, and also how many probably issues arise from copy paste. So obviously it's a little bit different when you're working with a tool like OPA, but knowing that there's a lot of people in the community use this and there's a lot of feedback into it, you tend to, hey, this policy probably isn't going to be poor for like new users or something like that, or this is what best practice is because it's community best practice and it's all sort of discussed. It's a little different from a Stack Overflow talk, but that's just me theorizing about where we're headed.
Well, I think where you're going there, Michael, is like the idea that if people take what you just said, Anders, and they've gone, okay, I now I realize that OPA's not just for Kubernetes and the world that I come from. It's actually it's large enough that I want to invest the time. If I want to break down the barriers to entry, then I can go to openpolicy.org. I believe it's openpolicy.org, is it not? There are openpolicyagent.org, and I can get tutorials there. But I think if there's things like that can make it easier out of the box, any barriers to entry we can break down. That's what we're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I think we can try.
All right. You're gonna. All right.
We're gonna try here.
All right. The demo gods. Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't prepared for this, but
that's okay. That kind of demo. We're gonna get a bad reputation now for telling people they don't
putting people on the spot. Yeah.
And then putting them on the spot when they don't want to be.
All right. So can you see my screen now, or
we can bring you in?
He's going to bring you in.
There you go.
Oh wow, that's super
great.
Cool. That's
yeah.
really cool.
So what we can see here is an entirely blank system. This is my personal tenant or instance. So there's not a whole lot going on here right now. So what we can do here is we can create a new system. And again, the available types right now, running in production, it's Kubernetes systems, there's Envoy systems, and there's custom systems. So if you have, we can probably look at the Kubernetes system. I'm just gonna. So what you'll see here is just what you'll get right out of the box here is just instructions to kind of now to install this system in your in your Kubernetes cluster. So I don't have a kube cluster running right now, but we could still check here how kind of the policy editing process works. So what we have here, we have two types of rules. There are validating rules, and there are mutating rules. And of course, that's just the validating admission controller and the mutating admission controller. So here we can see some of these kind of some of the policies that OPA, or sorry, that Styra DAS kind of ships with. So these are so maybe we can take that ingress. Prohibit host conflicts. That's a pretty good one to have. So the way it looks here is kind of like these Jira swim lanes. I can dive into the code if I want to, but for these, you can also choose to show them like this. So you can see these three columns here. There's unused to the left, there's monitored in the middle, and then there's enforced to the right. So what you probably want to do here is you probably want to have this rule in monitored and keep it there for a while, and eventually you'll see you can then start seeing under compliance. Of course, now we're not running, but then you can see that these all these resources are currently violating this policy or these policies. So you can kind of get you see an overview of the current state of your cluster, because that's also like there's one thing to kind of enforce a policy on any like future object or going forward, but you'd also want to know like what you already have deployed and whether there are violations there. Mm-hmm. So so you'll probably want to add a couple of rules like this.
I like that, and then too, once you're monitoring and you have a couple of things that pop into your compliance issue, well, you might say, hey, this isn't really a compliance issue. We already know that we're safe here, so we can maybe alter the rule, or maybe just leave it as unused because we have a check, or you just leave it in monitored in case something else happens. So you have sort of this adjusting workflow that you have. And can you by any chance like leave notes or anything like that in the resources? So let's say you move it from monitor to enforce. Is there sort of like notes that you can leave, or some sort of description? Maybe if it's like metadata in the Kubernetes resource, because sometimes you say, hey, like there's this compliance issue. We don't really need to worry about this. Leave a note because we've discussed this. So the next person coming in knows, hey, don't touch this resource. It doesn't need to be enforced, right? Does Styra have any sort of workflow like that?
For adding notes, like you can obviously you can edit your descriptions here for any rule you write yourself. So if you wanna add some information on why this isn't monitored and not enforced, for example, I'd probably add it there.
That works. Yeah.
There's also, of course, supported now in Kubernetes. I think it's since version 119 or something, where you can also choose to actually warn the end user rather than so if there is a violation, you could choose to still allow that resource to be deployed, but you send back a warning to the user. So maybe if they're using something that's about to be deprecated, or there's or if a future policy change might make that might forbid that, then you can return a warning also as part of the Kubernetes admission controller response. So those are two options to work with.
Very cool. Awesome. Yeah.
So if we want to check the custom system here, we could do that. Okay, so what we see here is just simple instructions for kind of starting an OPA and communicating with Styra, with the Styra DAS. So I'm gonna download this configuration here. And now I can start OPA on my local machine running with this configuration. So now we have an OPA running, and we have a policy here. This doesn't do a whole lot, of course. Well, maybe we could add a policy called allowed, and we're just gonna say that if the roles provided here, this is a iteration in Isrigo. So we just say here that in this case we don't care about the index itself. Like we could do this too if we did, but in this case we don't really care about that. But if one of the roles is the admin role, then we'd want the allow rule should be true, and we could do change this here. The default allow is equal to false. And now we can publish that, and we'll see if we check the logs here of our OPA, we'll see that OPA downloaded this new bundle. So whenever we have changes, we can just push them, and these OPAs are all configured to go every once. I don't know what the default is, maybe every 2 times a minute or something like that, but that's also configurable, of course. So basically OPA goes to the Styra to fetch these policy bundles and data. And as you can see here in these skipped upload, log upload skipped, it also goes in the other direction. So any decisions you're done by your OPAs is going to be reported back. So what we could do now is we could query our OPA running here locally. We're going to see B1 data. I think the policy was called rules. So that's going to be in the path here. So we're going to query the rules policy, and we're going to query the allow rule, and we're going to do a post request. So what we can see, and I'm going to pipe this into JQ so it looks pretty. Okay, so we can see here when we query the allow rule is false, which seems right, since that was what we set at. That was going to be the default. Maybe I can enhance here somewhat as well. So what we can do now is we can say, okay, let's try and provide some input to OPA. In this case, we wanted an array. We said with roles, and we say developer here. It should still be false. And if we add an admin role, should see that now the decision is actually true. So we are allowed. And what we can see here now is basically how we work with policy offering, and how OPAs fetch configuration, how they fetch policy, and how they report back on decisions. And one thing we'd need to configure here now, we can see that these decisions are all reported back. So we can see exactly what our OPA decided. And the one thing we're missing here, we can see here that in the input for this particular decision, we can see here's what's the roles provided. Though these are all like labeled as unknown right now, because we haven't told Styra yet that it's the allow rule. So we'd have to go in here and we'd have to say that this is the name of my rules, and I expect a true or a false response. or I expect some string value or so on. And we can also add like our own indexed columns, so we can search. And this is very useful if you have like things like groups and you want to quickly, or for Kubernetes, you might want to just filter on all pods or deployments and so on. So yeah, that's basically some super simplified demo and entirely unprepared. So
yeah, yes, that was a great demo for an unprepared demo. That was really awesome. I've never seen anybody do CLI typing that quickly in a live demo. So nice job.
Yeah, that was I was starting to think, you had this prepared. Come on. It's going too well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's and I actually like I don't work too much with like the Styra DAS and like the Styra the product. Obviously work for Styra, but mainly as a dev advocate, I talk OPA and open policy agent. So I was kind of scared of it too. I felt a bit rusty, but yeah, it worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So when you were testing it there and you had all of your sort of hits that were coming through, how would you sort of manage that at scale? Like, let's say it's going and it's, scraping every 30 seconds to see, active policies and if they're being enforced or not. Do you set your sort of decision trees based on that when you set up a policy? Is sort of the workflow, like you set up a policy, set it to monitor, and then go and look at what came up, and then sort of set up what you want to do around that monitoring? Because you could see the case where it's just constantly telling you, hey, there's these couple issues, right? So just Scorpio is asking, how does it monitor hits through the policy staging? Is there sort of this what if model for testing policies?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one of the nicer features of the DAS. And when I say DAS now, sorry, I keep repeating DAS. It's just Declarative Authorization Service. That's what the Styra DAS is. Yeah, so one of the nicer features is what we call like log replay or decision replay. So based on all like decisions made in the past, how would a policy change affect those decisions? So this is what we call like impact analysis. So you can make a policy change and kind of have that policy change replayed on all decisions made in the past. So, and then see, this would be the impact of making that change. So in our case, if we were to, remove the admin group, then or the admin role, we would see that these requests used to be allowed, and now they're no longer allowed, which could be the intention, but it could also be a mistake. Mm-hmm. And of course, OPA, both OPA and also Styra offers this pretty nice framework for unit testing on policies. So unit testing in combination with these impact analysis offers a really good framework for kind of building confidence in your policies, and knowing that when at the moment you deploy your policies, it's not gonna, things are hopefully not gonna break. I had to add that little disclaimer.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. Steve, I'm all out of questions. Anything else that's on the top of your mind?
No, that was really good. I'll just big thanks, Anders, for coming on. I know we kept you longer probably than you expected, and we made you do things that you maybe didn't want to do. But
yeah,
but you did them extremely well. So,
yeah, it was really good. Yeah, really educational. I learned a lot about OPA, and it was nice to have you on here and sort of demystify some of the things around it. That's cool.
It was really nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
By the way, before we kick you out, any places that people can get started with Styra, OPA, places that you recommend? So if I wanted to go play around with Styra or OPA, where should I go?
Yeah, I think it was mentioned already, the Rego Playground. Mm-hmm. it's a great resource to just kind of start hacking on Rego without even having to download OPA. There's also the Styra Academy, which is a video-based tutorials, and followed by like quiz-style tests. So you can. So that's another great learning resource. And of course, there's also like the Styra DAS is also available in a free edition, so anyone can try it out for themselves.
Awesome. Looks like we got our next tool time, or some tool time in the future, Steve. We can go do a very poor job at it compared to what Anders just did.
Yeah, just butcher that. Yeah, cool.
Awesome. Anders, thanks for joining. And
thanks for having me.
Have a great weekend. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
All
right.
That's good. He nailed it.
Awesome.
Like, I wasn't sure if he was really kidding. I didn't have a demo. Like when we spoke before this started, he said, "Do I have to do a demo?" I'm like, "Well, it'd be cool, but you don't have to." And he went, "Oh yeah." He didn't tell me either way, like whether he was going to have it or not. So it was like, that's what. Maybe I should just warn people in the future. If you don't come with one, we're gonna egg you on until you do one. So probably better to have one.
Probably for the best. Yeah, that was cool. All right, so next week, what do we want to talk about?
Well, next week you promised to do the tool time this week.
Yeah,
so
I
just got kicked to next week. So you got to come back and start explaining Grafana, Prometheus, all that monitoring and reporting you promised for this week. So you got
so that's next week.
Execution.
Yeah, next week. Next week is best practices, Grafana, Prometheus, setup, pain points that I've found in my life and things to avoid, and hopefully not some other CVEs, hopefully some big spenders next week. But yeah, tune in next Friday, same time, 12 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. GMT, and we'll be here to tell you everything that's screwed up in the security world.
You got it, man. That's how you get in contact with us everywhere, and we'll see you then.
Yeah, I'm Mike Foster.
I'm Steve Jaguar.
Have a good weekend.